Evolution, Chapter 13, Reactive. After their fight with Pandor, the trio was sent into the radiation showers at the base. It was just a precaution, but better safe than dead of radiation poisoning. When they were cleared, Jen went home, determined to catch some sleep before her class the next day. Gwen, though, sought out their grandfather. He smiled at her, setting aside a few files he'd been working on. "Gwen, how you feeling?" She grinned and hugged him. "I'm feeling fine, Grandpa. I wanted to talk to you, though." He nodded to the from him, and Gwen took it. She ran her hands through her hair. Max raised an eyebrow at her. She sighed and nodded. "I've applied to graduate early." Max's eyebrows shot up. "Gwen, that's fantastic. When do they think you'll walk the stage?" Gwen smiled lightly. "Maybe as early as next spring." Max pulled her into another hug. Gwen and Jen were only 2 hours apart in age, the redhead being the elder of the two. Both were in sophomore year of high school, would be juniors next year. Gwen had always been a more dedicated student than Jen. They were both smart, just in different ways. Gwen got her knowledge best out of a book. Jen learned through trial and error. Max frowned. "Why did you look so nervous when you came in? This is fantastic news." She nodded, but twisted a bit of her hair in her fingers. "It is, and I have my eye on a few colleges, but..." She paused. Max raised an eyebrow. "But..." "They're all out of state. Most of them are on the other side of the country." Max nodded. He thought he was understanding why she was so nervous. "I would give up my status as a plumber. It's not what I want to do anyway, but there's another problem." Max nodded. "Jen." Gwen breathed out in relief that he understood. "Exactly. I love her to pieces, but leaving her on her own? It's not the best of ideas. Eventually, sure, but she is not ready to go solo yet. I didn't know what to do, so I thought I'd talk to you." Max straightened the papers on his desk. "What about Kevin?" Gwen shrugged. "I haven't told him yet. I don't know what he'll want to do. He loves being a plumber." Max nodded. "There are openings on the East Coast, too, if he wanted to go with you." Gwen relaxed a little more. Max stroked his chin and thought, "Jen is good, but the Magistrata prefers to have an eye on all specialists as much as we can. Could be a teaching experience, too. I'll keep an eye on graduating trainees and see if anyone interesting crops up. If not, there's a lot of agents who jump at the chance to work with her." Gwen grimaced. Max smiled. "You can have a look over their files as her current partner to vet anyone we choose before any decisions are made. May have Kevin look them over, too. The three of you work together well. I'd like to have a team just as efficient when you're at college." He grinned again and stood, pulling her into another hug. "My granddaughter all grown up and off to college." Gwen hugged him back. She let go and headed home. A week later, they lost Andreas to Argit's stupid plan and a bomb set by the Forever Knights. The only good thing that came from that day was the fact that Jen actually did get an hour's uninterrupted sleep because of Argit's quills. The only thing that stopped her from asking him to knock her out again was the knowledge of his callous disregard for a being he claimed was his friend. Her mother was starting to worry. Jen could tell. She must have heard her one of the times she'd tried to muffle sobs and screams into her pillow. She didn't ask what was going on, though. Camille was a different story. "How are your nightmares, Jen?" the therapist asked. She was in her true form, a sort of human-shaped purple mud being. They had agreed that they would be honest with each other, and Camille had decided that the easiest way to do that was for there to be no barriers between them. Jen shrugged from her spot on the couch. "I want to say better, but that's not really true." "They're different, though." Jen took a deep breath. "He doesn't show up as much." She meant Ethan. She hadn't said the name much since he died, save when she'd mistaken Rex for him. She sighed again. Ghost freak. Either none of my transformations, no feedback. Or Grandpa. Camille nodded. That's good. That's progress, Jen. Jen shook her head. No, not really. She sighed and explained the vision she'd seen when Stardust had touched the enchanted book she and Kai had found in the Forever Night Castle. She knew she could trust Camille not to tell anyone, even Max or Gwen, what was happening. She sighed. And after I saw the thing, the dragon, I guess, there was a voice. It told me not to trust anyone. Camille frowned. Have you told anyone else what you saw in this vision? Jen shook her head. No, because the voice, the one from the book that told me not to trust anyone, it was mine. Camille stared at her. One of her antennae was twitching slightly, her version of a raised eyebrow. You're sure? Jen nodded. Stranger things have happened, but I haven't figured out why or how yet. And now this whole thing with the missing aliens has me a bit distracted. She ran her hands through her short hair and shook her head, standing and beginning to pace. I feel like I should have been able to do more to help Andreas. Maybe if I'd... She trailed off, flopping back onto the couch and burying her head in the pillow there. Camille waited for a moment before she spoke. You are in a position few would wish for. I see a lot of plumbers for work-related traumas and stresses. You are by far my youngest client. The one with the most responsibility, too. Everyone wonders if they could have done one single thing differently. Maybe it could have saved a life. But you did everything you could in that moment. Hindsight is a double-edged sword. It lets us see things clearer, but that can mean seeing mistakes with the benefit of time we didn't have when the situation was happening. Jen nodded into the pillow. So this dragon, what does it do in your nightmares? She looked up at Camille, and the woman could see confusion in her bright green eyes. That's the weird thing. Most of the time, it just stands there, staring at me with those eyes. She shuddered. I don't judge a being on what they look like. It would be highly hypocritical of me. But this thing, whatever it is, it's like every evil thing I've ever seen rolled up into one that then got worse and made a dragon. Whatever this thing is, it's pure evil. Camille frowned slightly. Jen tried not to make snap decisions about anyone. She tried to hang back and assess the situation. She wasn't always afforded that opportunity, as a lot of beings just attacked her. But she did try. For her to judge this apparition like this, it was unusual. A soft ding sounded from the clock set into the wall. Camille frowned as Jen stood. Their time was up. Jen only had so much time to do homework and the like with her duties as a hero, so they had to contend with an hour a week. It wasn't enough. Camille knew that, but that didn't change anything. Jen sighed and rubbed her eyes. Camille stood and stepped closer to her and reached out her hand. Jen took it and shook it. The Ultimatrix beeped and went yellow. Jen frowned. It's been doing that a lot, too. Camille smiled slightly. Jen had told her some of the basics about the Omnitrix and Ultimatrix, including what the different colors meant, so she wouldn't have to stop mid-story to explain. I'm guessing when Asmith made the Omnitrix, we were still at war. Jen nodded. Would you mind? Camille shook her head. Of course not. We're still family, Jen. At least when we're not in session. Jen smiled and scanned her first cousin once removed, in-law. The Ultimatrix adding a sample of Lenapan DNA to what Asmith called the playlist. With that, the brunette left to finish her trigonometry homework. Chapter 14, Electric. Jen jerked awake and glanced around. She let out a breath as she recognized the back of Kevin's car. The man himself was behind the wheel, Gwen by his side. He frowned. You all right back there? Jen nodded. I'm fine. Gwen shook her head at her cousin. Another nightmare? Jen shook her head, but Gwen clearly didn't believe her. I'm fine. Where are we going? Kevin frowned and turned down a street. Your house. You need sleep. Jen shook her head. No, I don't. Kevin rolled his eyes. Whatever, hero. Everyone needs sleep. He dropped her off, and she contemplated getting onto her motorcycle, now safely stored in the garage, and finding some trouble. Maybe finding the last alien if she was lucky. But her vision was slightly wobbly. She really did need sleep, what she could get of it anyway. She had no idea how long she'd been asleep when she woke to stinging sparks on her face. She moved on instinct, rolling out of her bed and onto her feet in an instant, which was lucky, because the final missing alien attacked where she had been, snapping her bed in half, sparks flying. She transformed into Jet Ray before the thing got another swing at her, sending them both crashing out of her room and down the hall. She barely registered her parents' door opening as she and the alien wrestled each other and went crashing out of the kitchen window. She finally managed to kick it off and took off. She had to lead it away from her family. Sandra scrambled with the fire extinguisher, managing to put out the small flames that had been scattered around her daughter's room. Carl was finding his phone. Snatching it up, he dialed Gwen's number. Gwen, yes, I'm sorry I woke you, but something's just attacked Jen. She's fighting it alone. 3 minutes? That's fine. He hung up and turned to Sandra. She's on her way. Sandra blasted the smoldering ruin of the bed again. Good. By the time Gwen got there, the fight was done. Rad was floating in the pool in a neighbor's backyard. Jen was fishing him out as Kevin vaulted over the fence. He had a box-like device in his hands. Jen nodded and dropped the unconscious Rad near Kevin. Soon he had the energy field up and running, and Jen turned back into herself. She sat down on the grass and let out a long breath. She was shaking slightly. Waking up like that was never going to be her favorite way to do things. Gwen helped her cousin to her feet. Jen nodded to her and stepped over to Kevin. We need to get him away from power lines. He can travel through them. He got into my room through my light fixture. Kevin nodded, attaching the device to his car. Coop and I have been working on something. Get in. Jen nodded and hopped into the back seat. Gwen got into the passenger side and Kevin drove them out of Bellwood. When they arrived at Los Soledad, Jen raised an eyebrow. Kevin got them set up in one of the old buildings that used to house experiments. Coop and I have been setting this up as a temporary holding cell for beings too dangerous to put in the holding cells at base. Jen nodded and they set Rad up into the device to hold him. Finding out that Agrigor had been using the Ultimatrix symbol to recapture the other aliens was a blow. An even worse one when Rad blasted the scanning beam and Jen smacked her head on the wall. She hissed in pain. Rad was gone completely, but it didn't take long for Agrigor to show up. The Ultimatrix seemed to be on the fritz, only giving her the option to turn into an Ampiri, Rad's species. That didn't go so well. Agrigor seemed more than content to use her for his purposes. The only reason they made it out in one piece was Gwen, using one of her more advanced spells. It sent them all crashing to the floor of Kevin's warehouse garage. Kevin caught Gwen, who seemed drained from the spell. Jen was stuck as her newest transformation, amphibian, but something was wrong. She could feel another presence in her mind. For a moment, one terrifying second, she thought it was Ghost Freak, but no. This one wasn't dark. It was bright, actually. She blinked. Rad? She asked aloud, and Gwen and Kevin stared at her, concern in their eyes. Jen, Rad's gone, Kevin said, sounding concerned. Amphibian's bright green eyes flashed electric blue. No, I'm not, Osmosian. I'm trapped within her mind. The eyes returned to normal. He's not wrong, but we should be able to fix it. We just have to get the Ultimatrix working again. Again, they flashed back to Rad's. No! If we fix the device, Agrigor will use it to find me. I will not be used as a power source. Jen screamed as she felt Rad's mind attacking hers. She barely heard Kevin and Gwen cry out in rage. She did catch one statement from her cousin. "Hurry up, Kevin! I can feel her fading!" The next thing she knew, Kevin had appeared in front of them, coated in rubber, with 2 car jumper cables in hand. He stuck them both to the Ultimatrix sigil on her chest, and both she and Rad screamed. In moments, they were separate again, electricity coursing through her as the Ampere attacked. Then there was something solid and non-conductible between them. She was swept off her feet and yanked away from the alien. She blinked as the smoke cleared. Kevin, still covered in rubber, grinned at her. "Told ya." The Ultimatrix beeped as he set Jen back on her feet. Next to Gwen. "Reboot complete. All systems restored." Rad hissed in anger and fear. Fighting Agrigor did not go well. He threw Kevin from the building, knocked Gwen out, and attempted to force Brainstorm to change back into amphibian by stabbing her next to the Ultimatrix symbol and trying to turn it. She howled in pain, and that was about when Rad showed back up. Agrigor lost all interest in her with his quarry returned, which was lucky as she turned back into herself. She could feel blood pooling on her stomach. The wound had to have been bad. All the bad ones transferred, unless she was a species that could heal itself. Clearly, Brainstorm did not have that ability. "Go! Get out of here!" Rad called out as he blasted at Agrigor with his lightning. The Osmosian countered with his spear. Gwen was back on her feet and leapt over to her cousin. She swore at the sight of the blood. She threw up a shield around herself and her cousin, spikes separating from it to keep it steady. Moving Jen now could be deadly. Rad, backed against a wall, let off a burst of electricity nearly identical to the one that had temporarily trapped him in the Ultimatrix. Everything around them exploded. Kevin screamed in terror as he watched the warehouse go up in flames, Gwen and Jen still inside.